Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic. Sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. There are more than 160 awesome interviews in the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. Listen to every episode on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. Today is an encore episode of my interview with Larry L., originally released February 2nd, 2022. Larry has been sober since February 2011. My 63rd interview is with a friend whom I've attended meetings with for more than 5 years, Larry L. Though Larry's story is similar in many ways to others who got sober late in life, his story is particularly poignant in that he drank his entire adult life to age 65 as a loner. Never married, Larry's daily routine for decades consisted of working long hours, then putting in a shift at the bar, literally drinking until closing time several days a week. Whatever little social life he had was confined to occasional barroom acquaintances. Drinking took its toll over the years as Larry lost jobs for poor performance that he attributes to the burgeoning alcoholism he was unaware of at the time. Seeking professional help for many years from psychotherapy, Larry's alcoholism was somehow obfuscated by other problems, such as anger and resentment, that needed to be dealt with first. Fortunately, one of his therapists helped him realize that it was alcohol ruining his life and that he should attend AA. The rest, as they say, is history, replete with the same fear, doubt, indignation, uncertainty, and apprehension that many AA newcomers face. Though he experienced somewhat of a slow start, Larry attended meetings and didn't drink in between. Eventually, he got a sponsor and worked the steps in earnest as his newfound fellowship relieved his isolation. Notably and estimably, Larry became immersed in service work through his participation in correctional facilities committees, bringing desperately needed AA into county jails and state prisons. At 75, Larry's involvement in AA is both admirable and dependable. It models the power of AA's recovery that's available to everyone, even those who've spent most of their adult lives in the disease. Proving that it's never too late to pursue and achieve sobriety in AA, Larry's story is one everybody should hear, especially those who've waited too many years to get sober. So, for the next hour, please enjoy my intriguing discussion with my fine friend and AA brother, Larry L.
My name is Larry, and I'm an alcoholic.
Thanks so much for being on the AA Recovery Interviews podcast series. I'm so glad you could do this today. We're actually meeting for this interview in a room where we have a evening meeting, and that's where I first met you, although I feel like I've known you a lot longer.
Well, technically, that's not accurate.
Oh, okay.
About 10 years ago or so, I used to go to a lot of speaker meetings, and I went to the 24-hour club, and you were one of the speakers there.
Oh, yeah, that 10 o'clock meeting over there.
I mean, there's no reason why you would remember me, but I remember you.
I think my story's gotten better since then, but I don't know. What did you think at the time?
I was really impressed. Well, in those days, I don't know, I haven't gone there in a long time, but in those days, there was a tradition that the organizer would only ask someone who had 15 years of sobriety. And it amazed me that you or anyone else speaking that night, those nights had that long in the program.
Yeah.
And that you could find people.
Well, I got asked, the woman who asked me was really nice about it. She's a good friend at the time.
She was a regular at the Friday night meeting that I used to go to. She just announced one night that she was looking for speakers, so anybody who had 15 years, and she was directing that Saturday night meeting. So
yeah.
That was one of the ways I explored more of the program was by going there.
Yeah, and a lot of times sponsors like to take their new sponsees down to that place because it's about as raw as you can get. People are coming in off the streets, do need a place to sleep, do want to get sober, maybe they don't, but they have meetings down there. There's certain rules of the place that kind of reflect the idea of people coming in and staying sober, at least for that day.
Yeah, at that place, they used to have a little two-seater couch next to the door, And anybody who did want a bed there had to stay in that couch for 4 hours. Usually it's through a presentation or a meeting or something like that, but it was like a rite of passage of some kind.
I think they called that the shaking sofa or the shaking couch or something like that, because most of the men who come in would be, pretty bad shape just coming in off the streets.
A lot of them had been sleeping on the cement the previous night, so they're in pretty rough shape, as you say. It's a club. They have about 10 detox beds upstairs, so that was part of that, if they had room for it. If they didn't have room, they'd help you find another place, certainly. I have kind of a sweet story from that experience. I didn't have a sponsor for the first 9 months or so, so I got there on my own. Uh-huh. One night, they never asked me for anything unless the regular speaker hadn't shown up. And so one night, because I was kind of a regular, and that lady came up to me. She says, "How long do you have?" And I didn't know what she meant. And I said, well, finally figured out it's 3 years, which was not true, actually, because it was 3 years that I had not drunk, but I had not been in the program for 3 years. Anyway, another time was a similar time when the regular speaker hadn't shown up, and they asked me if I would sub. And that night, of all nights, they ran out of Desire chips. And I said, "Does anyone want a Desire chip?" And sure enough, the guy who had been sitting on that couch came up, and so I didn't know I gave him my own Desire chip.
Oh, wow.
Which was a powerful experience.
I'll bet.
Anyway, some months later, there was a young man there who was really well-dressed and well-kept and just a nice, good-looking young man. He says, "You don't recognize me, do you?" I said, "No." He said, "I'm the guy you gave that chip to a few weeks back." And it just went to my heart,
What a heartwarming story.
Yeah.
You and I have known each other now in the meeting that we regularly attend about a little over 5.5 years, maybe longer than that.
Yes.
I've never really sat down with you beyond the short shares that we've had in meetings and the times we've talked on the phone. Mm-hmm. I've always been interested in the little tidbits that you share in meetings. How does a nice guy like you end up in a program like AA?
Wow. I did not have that so-called low bottom, like the people who go to the 24-hour club. But I did have I drank almost my entire adult life. Started in college. As you know, I'm Jewish, and, so there was occasional schnapps or wine at a Jewish event or something like that. But when I went to college, I used to go to the Jewish dinners on Friday night. And I thought it was kind of cute, but after dinner, anybody who hadn't finished their little glass of wine, I would go and finish it for them without asking. It was at the end of the night. By the time I took a trip to Israel on Icelandic Airlines, where they served some sort of hard liquor as just sort of a standard fare, afterwards, by that time, a few years later, I went down the aisle of the plane asking anyone who hadn't finished whether they would give me theirs. And again, I didn't think that there was anything inappropriate about it.
Were you bombed at the time when you did that?
I was by the time I finished.
They give out those little teeny bottles.
Yeah, they're just those little things. And the thing is, Icelandic Airlines, there were no student flights in those days. They only had one class, so everybody got treated the same. Anyway, I have these clear memories of how it began. It felt almost innocent and cute at the time, but before I knew it, of course, I was drinking regularly and getting drunk regularly, and embarrassingly so. And that was college days, and I drank till I was about 50 or 60 years old. Oddly enough, I stopped for about 5 years when my parents were old, because I knew that sooner or later they were going to call me and needing a ride to the emergency room or something, like just being old people and getting sick. And I didn't want that to happen, so I stopped for 5 years on my own. And then as soon as my father passed away, I said, well, I guess there's no reason not to drink, and I jumped back in. Finally, I saw a therapist. Back to your question, is how did I get into AA? I was seeing a therapist, excellent man, and he helped me a lot. And he helped me to stop drinking for about 3 years. And I started reading those self-help books and even I think the AA, daily reflections and whatever I could to help me through this. And there was a lot of white knuckling at night. I would stay at the office late at night till I was so tired that I knew I would go straight home instead of going to the bar.
Did this therapist not know about AA?
This was the interesting thing. It never came up.
Huh.
And he said that because I was drinking, it was interfering with my doing the work of the therapy. And I said, okay, well, I'll stop drinking. And
did you read into that like I did when I got told the same thing by a therapist? And so I wouldn't drink that day, but, I'd see that therapist maybe once every couple of weeks. So it meant I'd skip a day every couple of weeks.
Yeah, no, it was different. I mean, he didn't beat me up about it. He just said it's interfering with the work of the therapy. And so I stopped. But after a year or so of that, 3 years, I guess, I was reading these self-help books and realizing that I was still doing, it was irritating in those ways. It said, these books all said the same thing. Isn't it great that we don't do those bad things anymore? In the bad old days, we used to push away the people we loved, and we lied, and we did this, and we did that. And I realized one morning, I still do those things. I haven't been drinking for 3 years, and so I said it to him, the therapist, at the next session. And his immediate words were dry drunk. And I didn't know what that meant. He said something profound that I shall never forget. He said, it means you have stopped drinking, but you have not dealt with the things that made you start drinking in the first place. And not that session, but the next session, that's when he said, I think you should go to AA. I later realized that he was quite familiar. I never had the guts to ask him if he was an alcoholic himself, but he was clearly familiar with AA in lots of ways. He knew a lot of the sayings and, it works if you work it and things like that. That was just this kick in the stomach. I said, wait a minute, I haven't drunk for 3 years and you're telling me I should go to AA. It was in October time, and I remember I still didn't do it. Several months, and I emailed a lady, a friend of mine. I always give her credit, a Native American woman that I had met only on the internet. I've never met her in person. Unbeknownst to me at the time, her deceased first husband had been active in AA, so she knew about it. So I said, my therapist thinks I'm an alcoholic. What do you think? And she said, get a sponsor and do the steps.
So she was in the program herself?
No, she wasn't.
Her husband was.
Her husband had been when he was alive and had a lot of sponsees and stuff. So she was familiar with it from the side, but she recognized the issues. And that's what kicked my butt across the line. And I remember it very clearly, almost 11 years ago. My AA birthday will be next month. It'll be 11 years. So 11 years ago, on January 2nd, I went to my first AA meeting. And I wouldn't admit that I was an alcoholic until a month later when I kept hearing my story coming out of other people's mouths. And I said, well, gee whiz, if these people are alcoholic and they sound like me, I guess I must be one too. So not January 2nd, but February 2nd is my sobriety date.
But you were dry between that period of time?
That's correct. It just took another month. I kept coming back, like they said. I was going to the meetings for that month, but not admitting I was an alcoholic until a month went by. And then February 2nd, which was a month after I had started, I said, I must be one too.
What a noble thing to do. I mean, to wait until you actually have the desire to stop drinking, to be able to call yourself an alcoholic, using that as your sobriety date.
Back to that very first meeting, afterwards, there's a man, I didn't know the terminology then. He became sort of like my temporary sponsor, but I didn't realize. He took me under his wing. He came up to me after the first meeting. He says, it takes guts to come to an AA meeting and tell people that you're not an alcoholic.
If somebody called on you or whatever, would you say your name and then say something other than I'm an alcoholic, or would you just not say anything?
I don't remember specifically. I think I would just say my name. I'm Larry, and I'm here because I have a drinking problem or something like that.
Yeah.
I knew I had a drinking problem, as they say.
That's a good start, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you said you didn't start drinking till you were in college. What was your family of origin like, and how would any of that have led you to delay your drinking until college? Because most people start in high school or younger.
No, I was pretty clean all the way through high school. It was interesting. My birth parents were teetotalers, didn't drink at all. Dad told me at one time that he had gotten drunk with a hangover once when he was a teenager and never did it again. And my mother just never, she didn't even sip wine at Passover.
Mm-hmm.
However, my best friends, when I became a teenager at the synagogue, the parents were Holocaust survivors and very, very traditional.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have those drinks for Friday night kiddush. I always tell people that Purim is like a Jewish Mardi Gras. So there was a little bit more then, but I never got drunk.
Uh-huh.
And it was really not till I started college, and even that, oddly enough, the year I flew to Israel, where it was just, there was no big deal about, people just drank, and I took it to an extreme.
Are there any alcoholics in your family's history?
Not that I know of. I was the first. I mean, people drank, at a wedding, I'd see people drinking and something like that, but nothing that I thought was alcoholic. As a matter of fact, there was a little bar across the street from the grocery store where we lived on North Main Street, and Mom sort of looked down her nose. They were like, that was for lowlifes in the language of those days. Same thing with tattoos and all that kind of thing.
When you were a kid, do you have siblings?
I have an older brother, 5 years older than me.
Did he ever get involved with alcohol?
No. We both did occasional drugs in college the way everybody did in the 60s and 70s, but I don't think either one of us was manifested addictive of substance abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So I had no modeling for this at all. I started drinking, and as I say, all those years, I mean, I'm thinking about my life. I went to bars all the time. I never sat alone in my home and got drunk.
Did you go by yourself, or did you have friends at the time, or were you a solitary drinker?
When I first started, I would sit at a table and read a book or something like that. And then one time I decided to sit at the bar. And in the way of bars, it became sociable. People started talking, and it became my way of socializing.
Huh.
And I'm kind of a loner anyway, and I guess I came to think of going to the bars as a way of being sociable. It didn't strike me that what I was doing was unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, it was with people, and I knew sometimes I didn't want to get drunk, so I might leave a little bit early or skip a night or something like that, but I would go there and basically put in an evening shift at the bar. And later on, I got a job in Galveston, and I lost it because of the alcohol. But I was putting in 2 shifts. I'd work during the day and then go to the bar right after work and stay till lights out.
At what point in the average evening when you're going to the bar did you notice yourself becoming inebriated, or did you not notice it?
I suppose I noticed it, but I never had a point when I noticed it. What would happen is that I would get depressed.
Yeah.
And kind of a party and telling jokes and all that kind of a thing. And that sooner or later, I mean, I would put in, 4 or 5 drinks a night. I would just get down in my dumps. And I've shared at meetings recently that, I went to bars my entire life, and I have no memory of leaving a bar happy. Happy hour, yes. But by the time I left, I'm sure there may have been times, but I have no memory of leaving a bar happy.
And you did that for how many years?
My entire adult life.
Wow. And was that an every evening occurrence?
Not quite every evening. I guess certainly several times a week.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes every night, but, I would guess 3 to 5 times a week easily.
Were you a blackout drinker, or were you able to remember what went on the night before?
I don't remember being a blackout drinker. After a term I didn't know till I got into AA. But I guess looking back on it, I certainly remember there were times when I got home and didn't remember driving home.
Uh-huh.
But it wasn't like, it wasn't that low bottom type experience that I wake up someplace, some part of town where I didn't know where I was or how I got there. Or something. I never had any of those kinds of experiences.
Hmm.
Looking back, I remember thinking at one point that there was nobody I knew from work that I ever saw at the bars. And with the clarity of hindsight, it was a way of running away from whatever my day life was like.
So you were a functional drunk in that sense of the word.
Yes. I mean, I did lose jobs a couple of times.
Because of being drunk?
No. because I wasn't doing what the job required, but with the clarity of hindsight, it related to being hungover the next morning, or, well, let me phrase it a little bit differently. And this I have to thank the program for. I did not realize that all those years of drinking, I was running away from life generally and responsibility. And that included work, of course, but it also included relationships with women, getting married. I never got married, no kids that I know of. And all those years, it seemed to me the thing that I did. And as I mentioned earlier, I stopped altogether when I thought it would interfere with being a good son to my parents. So I just never associated it with the things that being in the program I've come to associate drinking with. It took the program to open my eyes to that. One of the early things that I had to fight and be careful about was not being overwhelmed by guilt and that sense of having wasted all those years. The feeling still comes over me a little bit. Both my parents died before I got into the program, so I never had a chance to make amends to them, except living amends, as we call it. But every now and then I realize it's just overwhelmingly strikes me that I never thanked them for all the stuff that they did for me. Part of being in therapy made me realize that I had these big anger issues toward my mother. And I thought that I didn't have them to my father, but then with this last therapist that I saw who helped me stop drinking, he helped me realize that I had these anger issues toward my father as well. And all of that was unconscious. Now whether the drinking was because of it or contributed to it, or whether I was trying to hide it because of the drinking, I have no idea.
Of course, if you were an isolator and you were drinking to get out of your isolation, it begs the question, what was going on in your family of origin that made you become an isolator?
Yes,
right,
exactly. And those are some of the things I dealt with in therapy. But when I was drinking, I never associated it with the drinking. I dealt with some of those issues when I was in therapy, but I didn't associate drinking as being stimulated by that kind of anger.
My experience with therapy, too, was that as long as there were lots of other reasons why things weren't going well in my life, I would never have to deal with the alcoholism and drug addiction. I did not consciously go in there with that thought in mind, but I became very readily self-convinced that my problems were other things.
Yes.
And as long as the focus was always on family of origin issues, anger issues, shame issues, whatever they would be, let me deal with those while I continue to drink and use drugs.
Yeah. It was several years into therapy before the therapist said that, your drinking is interfering with the work that you have to do in therapy.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that he was quite familiar with AA, but it didn't come up. And he didn't quite apologize for it, but he said that because I would see him when I was not drinking, So alcohol didn't interfere with or didn't overlap with the drinking, although I would go to the bar after I finished therapy. So it just didn't come up. And he didn't quite apologize for it, but he just said he hadn't been thinking how much the alcohol. Now, he really helped me with AA, and we discussed AA a lot after I started in the program. We're still seeing him. Yeah, I owe him a lot. I've been thinking lately about going back to therapy, as a matter of fact, but unfortunately he's passed away, just like several of the grand old men of AA that helped me so much. They have passed away 10 years later as well. Like my sponsor is gone now.
I knew Ed, and I'd see him in meetings. So would you attribute your sobriety and your getting sober to begin with, the turning point that led you into the program was this particular therapist?
Yes, no doubt about it.
Wow.
No doubt about it.
So you hit a different kind of bottom.
I suppose that's a good way of putting it, yeah. It's interesting saying it that way. I remember when I came into the program, it's one of the reasons I'm thinking about going back to therapy. I think I was certainly clinically depressed, and I was on antidepressants. I stopped taking them at some point, and that's one of the reasons I'm thinking about going back into therapy, because some of those depression feelings have come up again. But there was a darkness in my life at that time, and I don't think I've ever shared that at a meeting, but I remember what happened over that first year of coming to AA. I observed to my therapist once that there was something really therapeutic about AA, and he responded correctly, I think. AA is definitely therapeutic, but it's not therapy. They're two different things.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And one needs to separate between them. I remember a couple of months going to the Tuesday, Thursday meetings, and I went and I remember the first night I went there was birthday. It must have been the end of February. It was birthday night. And they don't give chips, they give birthday cards. And they all went up and people applauded and everything. And I remember thinking to myself, man, the last thing I want in my life is to stand up in front of a bunch of drunks with a birthday card. And by a year later, I was breaking the speed laws to get there. But what happened, I remember very clearly, because I thought about it a lot. When I first came into the program, everything was dark, and I looked forward to nothing. And by some time during that first year, I started looking forward to going to meetings to the point that, as I say, I was speeding to get that first birthday night.
Yeah. What were your initial meetings like when you first came in? Did you feel at home, comfortable, uncomfortable? What was the overriding feelings?
I didn't feel uncomfortable, but it was also new that some of it was kind of boring. The meeting that I started with was a step study, and they started with the 12 and 12. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know there was a big book. It came up, and I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. But, in the way of meetings, so after a while, certain people were saying the same thing at every meeting, and it was kind of boring. I'd kind of, okay, let's get on with it kind of thing. And it's then when I started going to regular meetings, the Tuesday, Thursday meetings, and then eventually my sponsor, Ed, he went to a different meeting for Friday night, a men's meeting. So I went with him to that and stopped going to that other Friday meeting. Most of the meetings I go to are men's meetings.
Yeah.
And I'm sure something similar must go on with the women's meetings, but there was a kind of depth or sharing from the heart when there weren't women in the room trying to impress kind of thing.
Fewer distractions. Even.
Yeah, right. Yeah, as a matter of fact, the first Friday night meetings I was going to, a good number of very good-looking women. I found I didn't have a sponsor, but I didn't need anybody to tell me, don't think about starting relationships in the first year, kind of thing, because I felt it was really hard to think about the program at those meetings with these good-looking ladies in the meeting.
I'm the same way. I've gone to men's meetings for years, and I go to mixed meetings too, but predominantly men's meetings. It's a different kind of energy. Being around a group of men where men are getting vulnerable and are really opening up is a extraordinary experience, and something that I think anybody who's never been to a gender-specific meeting, and I don't want to get political with other LGBTQ, et cetera, but there's just something about a men's meeting when you're sitting there, the energy in the room is powerful, at least it was for me. So were you riding over to meetings with your sponsor?
No, we'd go separately. Every now and then, unfortunately, he passed away at some point. Occasionally, if he was ill and couldn't drive, I would give him a ride.
Okay.
But generally, we would just go separately. I would go after work, just like I normally do.
Now, a lot of men go out to eat, or they go out to grab coffee after the meetings. Were you partaking of any of that?
I didn't do it at the earlier meetings. It seemed a little bit forced. Everybody was talking about fellowship, with a big F, that kind of thing. A number of the guys from the Friday night meeting, which became my home group, did go, and they still go to one of the restaurants between here and there. And I would join them there, and my sponsor and a couple of other guys. Gradually, the older guys stopped going, and I'm at an age now, I'm 75. In fact, there's just not very much in common. I don't have anything in common with the younger guys. The conversation would become a little, not unpleasant, but forced, the way you are at a party when you don't know anybody kind of thing.
Sure.
And it's the way of those things. It's one of the issues I'm having now. One of the reasons I'm thinking, I guess I shared this more than another meeting. One of the reasons I'm thinking about going back into therapy and feeling depressed is that I'm at an age where I probably should have retired some years ago. And at work, they like me, but I don't feel like I'm really contributing. I'm kind of I'm like the grandfather, it's like you let them watch the kids. And everything I do, if I left tomorrow, my sense they all like me, I think, but my sense is that nobody would miss me at all. So I really need to be thinking about what happens next in my life, what I need to be putting attention to.
Yeah.
Happily, there's no doubt that AA is part of my life now.
Oh, yeah.
I've shared at meetings. I cannot remember when it happened or why it happened, but it was one of those gradual changes that happens over time. That it did dawn on me, finally got through that, as you hear people say, no matter how good or bad the day has been, for me, a drink will make it worse. I just know. It happened just by accident over the holidays just now. This is the end of January, middle of January, and Christmas time. I stopped eating a lot of sugary things also, just being a little more healthy. And the manager, the head administrator, brought me a Christmas cookie that was shaped like a Jewish star. So he thought it was cute. And I took it, normally would not have taken it just because of the sugar. But so I took it and thanked him, of course, and I ate it. And then the sugar kicked in. And I thought to myself, if there was a whole package of cookies here, I would finish the whole package. And I just, I sort of shook myself. I said, that's the addiction. That's the addict in me.
Sugar is a big addiction.
Yeah, and that's about, when I stopped drinking, before I got into the program, when I stopped drinking, I gained 30 pounds or so because I substituted ice cream. Instead of going to the bars, I'd go have a pint of ice cream. I'd get 2 or 3 pints, one for appetizer, one for main course, one for dessert.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I gained weight. I couldn't understand why.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying my AA Recovery Interviews podcast, check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing and meaningful way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. While you're there, enhance your program with another audiobook I produced, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's an engaging audiobook that brings these stories to life for AA members who've never seen them. These timeless testimonials were originally cut to make room for newer stories in the third and fourth editions. But their vitally important messages of hope are as meaningful today as when they were first published. Many listeners will hear these stories for the very first time. Listen to a free sample of Lost Stories of the Big Book on Audible, Amazon, or iTunes. It's also available as a Kindle book or in paperback from Amazon if you'd like to read along. You're gonna love it. And we're back. So the meetings that you chose early on were men's meetings. At what point did you get a sponsor?
I would say about 9 months in.
Yeah. Why did you wait so long?
Well, I'm a loner, number one. And one of the things I found off-putting, there were a number of younger guys who, when they heard I was new to the program, I'm sure it was one of those things they picked up early on in the program or when they were in detox, in rehab, that the thing that helps you most is to help another drunk.
Right.
And they would offer, they say, "Oh, would you like me to be your sponsor?" And I'd say, "No." But finally, I heard Ed share one night, and it sounded like me. I said, "That's the man I would like to be my sponsor." Hearing him share from his bad old days, and I said, "Yeah, that sounds like me." And I went up to him after the meeting, and I said, "I'd like you to be my sponsor." And it was great. He said, "Let's talk." He didn't say no.
Oh, yeah.
And then we met for coffee someplace else another night, and he heard my story and why I wanted him to be my sponsor and everything. And he agreed. Happily, he agreed.
Yeah.
And it was just the right combination. He's, you knew him. He was one of those quiet guys.
Yeah.
I've heard, whether it's a God thing or not, I don't know. But, you hear people say, "Yeah, my sponsor was like a Marine drill sergeant, and he was exactly what I needed," kind of thing. I think if I had had that kind of person, I would have run away and never come back. That first night, I'm laughing because it's funny now. I used to have a friend at work who said the difference between tragedy and comedy is time.
Time.
And I remember when I decided that I would go to AA, I called up Intergroup, and I didn't know the terminology. I said, "What's a closed meeting? What's an open meeting?" So, closed meeting. She says, That's for people who have a real drinking problem. I said, well, that's not me, of course. And then the step study, I said, well, I'm an academic. This is a study that read the book that makes sense to me. You hear a lot of times at meetings when someone says it's their very first meeting, it's like they turn the lights off and a spotlight goes on them, and everybody's just talking to them all night long. And it was not like that at all. They went around and came to me and said, well, I know I've got a drinking problem. I'm not sure I'm an alcoholic. And they said, okay, next. And nobody beat me up about it. It was just, I remember I did not have words for it that night as I was leaving that very first meeting. 4 men gave me their names and numbers. So they just came up and said, here's my number. Call if you want to talk. And I remember as I was standing there by the door thinking, I've never had the experience any place on this planet where people were just accepting me for who I am and not trying to force something down my throat. I walked back out to the parking lot.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to frame that too, because for as isolated as you were, for people to reach out like that.
Yes.
And of course, in hindsight, you could see why people do that is to undergird their own sobriety and strengthen their own program. But somewhere along the way, the impact that can have on the new guy can sometimes be profound.
Yes.
So you waited 9 months before you asked Ed to be your sponsor. During that 9-month period, were you attempting to work the steps by yourself, or were you just going to meetings?
No, I was really just going to meetings and different kinds of meetings. I was going to 4 or 5 meetings a week.
And were you enjoying them?
Yeah, because I was learning a lot. The speaker meetings were really, really important. And I was trying to do as much as I could. And I kept hearing people say, get a sponsor and do the steps. And I was amazed at the things they shared in the context of getting a sponsor and doing the steps. As I said, a number of people, I wouldn't say they pushed themselves on me, but they offered to be my sponsor. And it was the isolator in me, almost the fact that they were offering to be my sponsor made me not want to have them as my sponsor.
Yeah, I get that.
Groucho Marx supposedly said that he would not be a member of any club that would have him as a member.
Right.
So the fact that these guys were coming up to me and offering made me, especially people younger than me, one meeting I would go to, and I remember complaining as I was going out. It did amaze me that some of these young guys who'd been in the program for years, longer than me already, they'd been in and out of rehab several times, and these words of wisdom from the program were coming out of them. Yeah. And I would think to myself, I drank longer than these guys have been alive. How is it that they're so smart and wise? And this one guy said, that sounds like a resentment. You should add this to your 4th step.
Are you attempting to do one?
Well, by the time that came up, I think I must have had a sponsor. I have to say, I found meetings. There were a couple of meetings in the way of those things that I went once and said, this is not for me. Yeah. But I found meetings that were really so powerful. Yeah. They just grabbed me by the throat. Like the speaker meetings at the 24-Hour Club. I went there for Thanksgiving, my first Thanksgiving in the program, standing room only. And I realized that everybody in this house, that house had saved their lives. And it was just these powerful experiences. Up on Sunday nights, because I was just looking for a Sunday night meeting, I went every Sunday night, and eventually, because I was a regular, they asked me to run the coffee bar for them.
Oh, wow.
so it just, in these small increments.
You kind of fell into service work, didn't you?
Exactly.
So you were able to, without having a sponsor, without really doing much with the steps, stay sober and stay engaged in AA through the number of meetings you were going to. Yes. So the predominant things you were doing was you were going to meetings and you weren't drinking. And then at some point along the way, you got a sponsor and started to do the other things.
Yes. And my therapist was helpful. He said, so how's it going? I said, it's a pain in the butt. He said, what do you mean? I said, these goddamn steps. I'm just trying to get through this. He says, well, what's so hard? And I said, look, I'm just trying to, and I almost cannot believe these words came out of my mouth. I said, I'm not worried about drinking anymore. I just want to get through the goddamn steps. So I must have had a sponsor by that point. It's funny because I often do this Freudian slip where I refer to my therapist as my sponsor and my sponsor as my therapist. But he smiled and he said, well, it's a way of living. It's a program for living. It's not just doing the steps. I said, that's what I said to Steve, that I'm not worried about drinking. That was a Tuesday, and I remember clearly that Saturday night, the same week, I went to the speaker meeting over at the 24-Hour Club, and the day manager was there drunk on the porch.
Oh, no.
And I thought to myself, that's step one right in front of me. And I learned that night that step one never goes away. We get caught up in all the other things in life and the program.
Well, we acknowledge that we admit it. We admit that we're powerless, and we admit that our lives are unmanageable, but somewhere along the way we stop accepting it.
Yeah.
I get that. That's big. So as you made your way into the years in the program, I know one of the things that you do, you've become involved for a number of years now with the corrections, which is a fantastic service.
Yeah, it's powerful.
That goes beyond what a lot of people are willing to do. Can you speak to that and how you got involved?
It's powerful. Things have changed with COVID, so my own head needs to get back involved with it.
Yeah.
I'm still involved with committees and stuff like that, but I'm not going inside anymore to take meetings. One of the things from my home group is that I became the GSR. Here we go, laughing. I said, well, I knew they had an extra meeting a month, something like that. So I figured, well, I go to boring meetings at work all the time. I could go to a boring meeting. And no one told me about these 2-day up at the hotel by the airport every 3 months kind of thing. So as usual, I joke that all of AA is like a big bait and switch scam to me. Because it's like you get in thinking you just want to stop drinking, and nobody tells you, you have to start treating other people like human beings, and you have to be honorable, you have to stop lying. Anyways, so I went to the quarterly area assembly, just about the most boring meetings I've ever been to in my life. Anyways, but then something happened. It was just, in the way these things, whether it's a God thing or what, I don't know. A woman got up and she was going on and on and on and on. And everybody, I was rolling my eyes. I think everybody was. Finally, one of the big dogs gets down from the stage and goes to the microphone and says, "This is the way it is. End of story." About 5 minutes later, the first lady got back up to the microphone. And I'm not sure that I heard a groan in the entire, there's like 300 people there. Or whether I just groaned, I don't know. But she got up and she said, "I was wrong," and sat down. And I thought to myself, I was in shock. I thought to myself, that's step 10 right in front of me. Just like that drunk, to me it was step 1.
Step 1.
This is step 10 right in front. And I thanked the lady on my way out. I said, that took guts to get up and do that. Anyways, you go around at the tables there, and you pick up cards and stuff like that. I don't know if I left my card or I just picked up cards. I started getting emails out of the blue for the Correctional Facilities Committee. I have no idea why or how. Maybe I signed something. I don't know. So finally I emailed back and I said, look, I don't know how you got my email address, but no, I'm not interested. Thank you, but I'm not interested. I kept getting the emails. He just didn't stop. I know the man. I just spoke with him this morning. He's real active with the community. But anyway, he just didn't. So finally I said, okay, well, let me go. I'm trying to find out how the program's all about, so let me go and see what's going on. Turns out that meeting was not even a regular Correctional Facilities Committee. It was for their annual conference planning meeting.
Oh, wow.
So before I knew it, I was into it.
You were in the deep end.
Deep end, that's right. And I went to the annual conference, and it was there that it was just great. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Another thing that had happened around the same time when I had my first AA birthday, it dawned on me that there was a prison inside my head. And I was stuck in that prison. And so there was something that the idea of taking meetings into prisons for inmates resonated somehow. At that time, it gets even weirder, there are actually 2 correctional facilities committees. One of them was related to area, and the other was actually, at that time, related to intergroup. So several of the people I knew were in both committees, so I joined both committees. I thought, well, this is just the thing that AA people do, you know.
And you were sober how long by this point?
I guess about a year and a half. I guess somehow I understood without anyone telling me that the more I did, the better. And Frank, back to being an isolator, I wasn't doing anything else with my life. It wasn't like I was sociable in the synagogue or in some social group or anything like that. I wasn't married and didn't have kids and all that kind of thing. And I've seen men in the meetings say that, since they started as young men and now they're married and kids and they just can't get to meetings as frequently. So I understood that. So I joined the committees, but it took me a year or more. I was frankly just afraid to go inside. Mm. And also, God bless the men who are involved. They're driving to these prisons. Some of them are driving 2 and 3 hours to get to the prison.
Yeah, like to Huntsville.
Yeah. And they get there, and it's locked down for some reason. They can't get in. Chuck, he shared that he went to a meeting. He called to make sure that they were not locked down.
Right.
And they said they were open. And he went, and they were locked down in the 2 hours that it took him to get there. Jeez. And then they drive back. So this is like all-day events. God bless the men and women who are doing these things. Yeah. So I found out that there were meetings at Harris County Jail, which is just downtown. Mm-hmm. And I went with one of the guys. He was the chair of the committee at the time. So I said, okay, I'll get my feet wet. It's close. I can go there right after work. I don't have to drive 3 and 4 hours. Uh-huh. So I went with him in downtown, and that first time they closed the door behind you, they locked the door behind you before they opened the door in front of you. Mm. I realized, if they didn't want me to go home, I wouldn't be able to go home tonight.
Yeah.
I'd never been arrested. All those years of driving under the influence, all those years of my life, my adult life, drinking and driving, I was never arrested. Huh. And one of the guys in the committee always says, yeah, but you should have been. That's for sure. And one of the things they say in the Correctional Facilities Committees is those people are doing our time.
Yeah, they're doing our time. Yeah.
Anyways, I go in, and of course, also in the way of these, this is Larry. This is his first time here. He's going to lead the meeting.
That's great.
Just a classic. So and
are these all trustees?
No. These are just men on the floor.
The general population.
Yeah. Now, I later learned, at least on the floor that we went, these were not the worst of the worst. They didn't cause trouble. They were allowed them out of their cell areas to go to the chapel room on their own. They weren't escorted by a guard or anything. So on other floors, and that's the other thing, there aren't enough volunteers, so we only had a meeting on our floor in that jail. So if you were not on our floor, you never got a meeting. And every now and then we'd get, they call it an I-60 form, which is is there a meeting? Can someone get me a big book? From people, because a lot of the men. I shared with one of the guys who planted the seed for going in. I said, I've never been arrested. And he said, they know how to be arrested. He said, they don't know how to stay sober. And I've been told that 80% of the crimes that get people into jail are related to alcohol or drugs. Yeah. One way or the other. Either while they're under the influence or stealing to get money to get under the influence or something like that. So anyway, the man, I wanted to be honest with them. So I said, look, first time I've ever been in jail, never been arrested. I'm frankly kind of uptight. Yeah. Said I. And one of the men said, you're not afraid of us. You're afraid of being locked up. Huh. And I have to admit, that I hesitate to say it, but the meeting at the jail was at 6 o'clock, which gave me time to get to my 8 o'clock meeting here at the church, which worked out fine. Sometimes the sharing in that jail meeting was so solid that I almost didn't feel like going to my regular meeting. Huh. And the thing is, the regular meeting is solid. I mean, they really helped me a lot. Oh, yeah. In my program. But, you hear stuff, like you say, from the heart. And, some of the guys are just there, and you have your hassles. They just want to get out of their cell.
Sure.
You never know. But I thought to myself, you don't know how sincere people are in regular meetings either.
That's a good point.
So I remember clearly, sometimes these things just jump out at you. This man, he only came to 2 sessions. He said that he had been in and out of prison for 30 years of his life.
Huh.
And within 6 months of his most recent release, he was back in Harris County Jail.
Mm.
But, and this happened with some of them, had been in the program for 35 years. He knew AA better than I did. He knew the big book. He knew all this stuff.
So was he that sober horse thief everybody's talking about?
Well, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I don't know, but he made this. Then at the next session, he said, I've been going to meetings all my life, but coming to this meeting, meaning our jail meeting, made me realize that I wasn't really doing the program.
Yeah.
I was going to meetings, but I wasn't doing the program. And he wasn't released, but he was transferred to like a drug abuse program, which is inside the system. And every now and then, something like that would be shared at one of the jail meetings. There's a guy who's real active in the committee, and when he was in prison, he said he only went to AA because they had air conditioning. The prison. He said that's the only reason he started going there. But it clicked, in the way it does. And I remember one guy, he said, before coming here regularly, I think I may be an addict. He thought he was in jail because he'd beat up his wife. But listening to the shares, and another sweet story, like that guy from the 24-Hour Club, at my home group meeting, Friday night meeting with my sponsor, I get a young fellow, really well-groomed, good-looking young man, came up to me and says, you don't recognize me, do you? I said, no. He said, you gave me my sobriety chip in Harris County Jail.
He had stayed sober since that time?
Apparently.
How many years was that?
This was, I didn't go into detail with him. I'm sure it was within a year, But still, just the fact that he was coming to a meeting afterwards.
So you really made an impact on people's lives along the way, haven't you?
I don't know about that.
Well, no, I'll say it for you because I've noticed that you do it, and you're always making announcements about the Correctional Facilities Committee and about people going into the prisons. And, you're great with the public service announcements about that. And I know that there are guys and gals who have gotten involved with the prisons because of your messages and because of you telling them about the committee. The thing you said about the prison in your mind, that's remarkable. I mean, that's kind of self-realization. And to connect that with the experience of being of service to men behind bars, it's exceptional. And I really honor you for that. That's a beautiful thing. And it sounds like another God deal, which brings up the topic of God and what you thought when you came into AA, seeing God in the steps. How has your relationship grown or changed or been a different experience than you might have thought it would be when you came into AA?
I'll tell you the truth. I did, and I still have problems with that area. I think, and I used to be very religious. I used to be a professional Jew, and I grew up with people who, Holocaust survivors and people who were really solid in their religion. I don't mean just ritually observant, but just real solid.
Right.
I don't know whether it's because I'm in academics or too much in my head, but I have come over the years to have more and more problems with that. What you hear at meetings often is that people who are too smart for the program.
Yeah.
I think that may be, but there's enough of me that's still there, or enough of there that's still in me, that the very first night I came, the very first meeting I went to here, there was something going on at the church, and the parking lot was full. And I said, that's God's way of telling me that I shouldn't go to AA.
Can't find a parking spot.
And the thought actually crossed my mind. And just then, somebody pulled out.
Oh, God.
I said, damn, I don't have that excuse anymore. I remember coming driving home from the 24-hour club one night, and I remember feeling angry, and I didn't understand why. Why am I feeling so angry? And it finally dawned on me that AA has taken away all my excuses. So when I come to meetings, and especially, some meetings are boring, some shares, they're not all great, but when these nuggets are presented by just regular people, we're not talking about great theologians here, and I can't help, and other people say it too, you can't help but feeling that these are words of God coming through other people's mouths.
Yeah. What a beautiful realization.
Yeah. And it dawned on me, as much as I have problems with this stuff, the God stuff.
Yeah.
And this has been from the beginning, because I remember when Ed took me through, when we did the third step prayer, I kind of stumbled.
Yeah. I can imagine.
I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm going to say it, but I'm not really sure I believe it, kind of thing,
Yeah.
And I felt like I was maybe not being completely honest with him.
Yeah.
I finally, okay, let's just get on with it, because there's 8 more steps.
Well, and also there's this sense of disloyalty to your own religion, especially when on the third step the guy says, now let's kneel down together and hold hands, and saying, well, am I being disloyal to my heritage?
Yeah.
And at some point I had to say, maybe not, but I got to do this anyway. I got to do this anyway.
Actually, it's interesting you say, on Christmas Day, just now, there's a fellow in my home group. He's real religious, real solid in the program. And he said, this sounds odd, but I'm remembering that Jesus was Jewish, and so I feel like I should send you greetings anyway.
That's great.
I texted back to him, not to worry. One of the things that the program has taught me is to look for the similarities rather than the differences.
Yeah.
And so that's really what it is. And I've shared at meetings, I don't see the wind, but I see the effect of the wind when the trees blow. So I guess maybe all of this comes into some bucket of agnosticism as opposed to atheism. I just, whenever I'm around people who are believers, I find myself not believing. And when I'm around non-believers, I find myself believing, and it's just kind of that not quite sure where I am in all this.
Well, at least you're open to the idea, and I've heard you express a lot of that kind of sentiment over the years that I've known you. And of course, I've over the years struggled with some of that as well. But you know what? I think it's okay, because we're staying sober. We're being of service to others.
Yeah.
You, my friend, are just a really shining example of service work and a man who's committed to working a good program. I've really enjoyed getting to know you over all these years, and the fact that you shared such personal parts of your life with me in this interview means that our friendship is probably even stronger than I thought it was. So that's a beautiful thing as well. And my feeling in kind of wrapping up is to say, as long as you're with us, as long as you're here, isolation will always be just a choice.
Well said.
So I want to say thanks for doing this, Larry.
It's my pleasure. I can say, and I really mean this, AA has given me a heck of a lot more than I've given it. That's for sure. I remember I was one of those jail stories. I was sharing it with Wiley, who passed away, and who was also just incredibly solid in the program. And I was a little bit puffed up. I wanted to get some strokes, saying, "Oh, this wonderful thing happened." He says, "Yes, and you're doing exactly what the program wants you to do." And he grounded. He says, "It's not me. It's not Larry doing these things. It's the program doing these things."
Yeah, and it's God doing for us what we cannot sometimes do for ourselves through us. I just think it's a lovely way to go through life, being able to keep that in mind. And I don't always. I know most people don't, but when they do, then we can have exchanges like this and can be meaningful friends. I love you, and I'm so happy to have you in my life, and you've made a big difference to me. It's funny how people kind of come in and go out of your life, but over the years I've been in AA, there's so many people that have come in but not gone out. They may get out, natural causes, but or because they go out and drink, but the vast majority of them I have to believe that us being close to each other is the reason why we stay sober, and that's why we stay close to each other. So it's a circuitous sort of thing.
That's I think I was kind of alluding to it earlier when I said that I'm going through some rough times now personally, but there's one thing that I do know is that whatever comes next, drinking is not going to be part of it. Yeah, and I can thank the program for that, and ultimately the therapist who got me into the program, and you.
And you. Larry, thanks again.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to do this.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? It's another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. If you want to contact me directly with any comments, questions, or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.